Good afternoon. Well, it's just about 60 something, so it's comfortable out. And I wonder if we'll just skip right into winter. But only in the evening is it's cool in the 50s, so it's nice out. There are very strange things going on in our politics. You don't need me to tell you that. It's obvious every day. And today we have the spectacle of disagreement on foreign policy that some of us would think would be settled even among the participants. So let me start with this. Biden said today that no nation is secure if we don't stand up for Ukraine. I've agreed with that principle from the beginning when Biden was easing his way into helping Ukraine and probably studying what was going on. I remain one of those who thinks air power should have been supplied almost from the beginning. But many people thought that when Russia invaded Ukraine, it would take 3 days and be over. And so it was a lost cause. Now, others said no. And Zelensky and his leadership and his military has proven early skeptics, including Putin, to be wrong about how one can assail Ukraine. Now, here's another comparison that I think is ironic. We had a relationship, if you can call it that, between Trump and Zelensky. Trump wanted Zelensky to do him a little favor, to get dirt or begin an investigation against Hunter Biden, because then former Vice President and Senator Biden looked like he could beat Trump. And so Trump was looking for an angle. And what he was basically saying, Trump was going to withhold military support in exchange for Zelensky giving him the dirt, or at least saying he was having an investigation of Hunter Biden to embarrass and compromise the presidential candidacy of Joe Biden. Okay, Flair, now let's skip forward. Today in the White House, Zelensky's in the White House, and he's there with Biden, and Biden is pitching for funds to support Zelensky in his endeavors. Now, you may or may not remember that a part of what Trump wanted from Zelensky required Zelensky to do certain things before Trump would have him at the White House. And so Trump offered other locations to give legitimacy to Zelensky, but as far as I can recall, he never went forward with any of them, and not with the White House visit. So here we are today, and on the same day that I'm talking to you in my cathedral of trees, McCarthy, who is the Speaker of the House, says he doesn't have time to authorize the funds to support Zelensky against Putin. Now, who in my lifetime, and for some time before my lifetime, would think that the Republicans would find themselves on the side of a dictator, a Soviet ideologue, against the Iron Curtain family just over the border, like Ukraine? But that's where they are. And why are they there? Is this because Trump requires it? So that's a very strange thing. And the point that I'm making is that the fact that this has occurred says there are really powerful effects to supporting Trump when you have to support, as the Republicans do, an effort to help Putin, don't drink his tea, over Zelensky, who's proven himself to be quite a leader for a man who was an entertainer. We've had those before. Think of Reagan. and as compared to a different entertainer, the guy who liked to fire people on the air, Trump. So my first thought today is how Trump, even out of office, as just a candidate, is affecting our allies around the world, particularly Ukraine at this time when we should be supporting them, instead of clumsily failing to deal with our financial responsibilities as a government rather than having the government shut down. So that's number one. Number two on my hit parade is what's going on in Georgia. Now, you may have followed that there was a request to interview the jurors, that is the grand jury jurors, and ask them questions about the indictment that they presented. And the judge said, yeah, sure, that'd be okay. Now, I want to underscore the fact that the DA prosecutor, Willis, she opposed this, as she rightly should have. If there was a claim about a juror or jurors in any way that could affect the indictment, that would be one thing. But this appears tantamount to a fishing expedition at a time when the jurors have been compromised by the public threats bandied about by Trump. That's just not acceptable. Now, the judge has put in place several, protective devices. The juror has to agree to be interviewed, has to be voluntary. It will occur in the courtroom. The prosecution will be present. The questions will have to be accepted by the judge. Still, I think this is an exercise that is wrong. Now, in New York years ago, and I believe they still have the same provisions, if you could demonstrate an indictment that had two charges that both were founded on the same facts. So, for example, a conspiracy that relied on exactly the same facts as the substantive count alleging another crime or the same crime. If there were no difference in the facts, then one or the other would be dismissed. So I made such a motion in New York. And my thinking was, well, if I was the prosecutor, would I say, well, some of the evidence is for this charge and the other evidence is for that other charge. So I debated even making the motion. I was responsible with a team of attorneys, and this was one of my assignments, this particular issue. And finally I thought, well, I'm going to put it in, and I did. And in connection with this proceeding, the court reads the grand jury and decides whether or not the same evidence was used for two counts. And when the judge called my issue first among, we had about 20 in the Manhattan Supreme Court, which is the trial court in New York. It's not the appellate court. The judge said, and I'm appearing as a defense attorney, obviously, and the judge called my issue first. And I thought, wow, he's getting rid of the easy ones. But no, he agreed with me. He dismissed the substantive count. The trial went forward without my client, who I had severed. The other persons who stood trial, some were acquitted. No one was convicted of conspiracy. So then I made a motion basically saying you have to conspire with someone, and if no one at the trial was found in a conspiracy, my client can't conspire with the person that she is. And so the judge dismissed that count as well. That's a process I understand, but this process sounds like it's been created for this trial and this trial alone. And if there are charges being made, and I could have overlooked them, there must be other ways to do it, including that the judge speaks to the juror alone with nobody else present, which does happen. or the presiding judge, the judge who presided over the grand jury, would do that, meaning there was a judge who was responsible for any questions about the grand jury, but that judge did not get this trial. Instead, we gave it to an inexperienced judge. So it will be interesting to follow that. It should never have happened, the decision the court made. It's a process that's very dangerous, and we'll see what happens. Now, Georgia's up for another piece of breaking news. There's a fellow named Lin Wood, whose name popped up in the recent release of grand jury matters in Georgia. And Lin Wood was a MAGA lawyer, and he was represented at one point by Mr. McDougal. Why does any of that matter? Well, it matters because Mr. McDougal represents presently Jeffrey Clark, and Jeffrey Clark is going to be tried. So here's the problem. If Lin Wood is going to testify against Jeffrey Clark when McDougal represented Lin Wood, isn't that an unsurmountable conflict requiring McDougal to withdraw because the government witness is a legitimate witness? And that'll probably be litigated. So, and there will be other conflicts, and how they are dealt with will determine with what dispatch the case moves forward and is tried. Finally, I think one of the most important things that's going on is there are those ready for prime time in the order of the dramatic personages involved in the Trump prosecutions, investigations, and civil suits. And they go like this. We just look at the four. There are 2 state cases and 2 federal cases. You have situations, particularly in Georgia, where there's overlapping representation and conflicts. And what will happen with those cases as they go forward? There may be problems. And you may remember a long time ago when I was impatient, but I'm not sure my advice wasn't right then. It goes like this. You can try a case, and you can either try it thin or you can try it thick. Usually, the nature of the case and the significance of the defendants helps you figure out how you want to do that. Now, in my view, when we had the tape recording of Trump leaning on the Secretary of State for Georgia, saying, just give me the votes +1 so that I can beat Biden, plainly interfering, plainly harassing, and threatening the Secretary of State. Thin case would have been against Trump for those matters relating to that. Okay. But instead, I'm not critical, but I'll explain what I'm concerned about. I thought going thin with that served the proposition that Trump is the guy we want to get. Trump is the mastermind, the evil mastermind, and a victory over him, a legitimate victory, in a courtroom with a jury and evidence would scare the others out of the bleachers and punish and cause an accounting for the principal. Now, D.A. Willis decided to make it a thick trial. And I think the response has been dramatic because it tells the story in a way, just like the January 6th committee, that is persuasive to observers, and myself included. And it struck me that Willis is the train that could. I mean, she just persists and she goes and she will, but I'm not sure that her case is going to be decided with a conviction before the election. On the other hand, we have the prosecution in D.C. by Special Counsel Smith. And in that case, he made Trump the defendant in 4 counts. And that is a relatively thin case in the sense that we don't have certain conflicts. We don't have to worry about it being in federal court, and so on and so forth. And he has a good chance, depending upon how events unfold, of starting this case next March and finishing it, and I believe getting a conviction before our presidential election. Now, I hold accountable the judge in Georgia for not having the nerve, courage, common sense, and experience to put them all on trial in October, start the case, and then continue elements of it to deal with any claim of not being sufficiently prepared or whatever it is, and then commencing the trial when and as was possible and sensible, the actual trial. And, you know, I've repeated this before, but there have been trials with as many as, 20 or more people. And in the Southern District of New York, it's true. And the sheriff in Georgia said they'd had a trial involving 28 defendants. So that's where we stand. The vectors continue to be favorable for those of us who want justice done and these people undone. The vectors continue to point an arrow toward what's right and just. And I don't know what the polling is among the base, but the way I count a base is if you're a percentage of all Republicans, and that's closer to 30%, you don't win elections that way, and you may not even be able to tip the Electoral College by focusing on several battleground states to get past it. So I see Trump being convicted before the election, and if the nominee, losing the general election to Biden. That's my prediction. Come chase me around my tree-lined walk if I'm wrong, but I think that's a fair estimate. So I say goodbye to you for today and my cathedral of trees. All the best. Bye-bye.